April 14th, 1968. Udorn Royal Thai Air Force Base, Northern Thailand. Major David L. Carter, 34, stood inside Hangar 3, staring at something no American pilot had ever touched before, a captured MiG-21 MiG-21F, 13, airframe number 4326, its silver skin scarred, canopy cracked, its red star half burned away. The mechanics around him were buzzing with disbelief. The MiG looked primitive, bare metal skin, narrow tires, a cockpit barely big enough for a man. One technician scoffed. "This thing looks like it was built in a garage." Carter didn't laugh. He'd seen this garage-built Soviet fighter cut through his squadron's F-4 Phantoms over North Vietnam like scalpels through flesh. In March, he had lost two close friends in a single engagement over Haiphong Bay. Both were flying the best jet America had ever built. Both were dead before they even knew they were under attack. The MiG before him wasn't a wreck, it was a revelation. It had defected. A North Vietnamese pilot, disillusioned and bribed through an Israeli intermediary, had flown it to Udorn under Operation HAVE DOUGHNUT. Now the Air Force had something priceless. A chance to understand why a fighter one-third the Phantom's size could keep humiliating it in combat. Carter was a combat pilot, not a test engineer, but he had something rarer, curiosity born of loss. He'd survived more than 100 sorties over the North, enough to know that courage wasn't enough when your airplane fought against its own design philosophy. He walked around the MiG's airframe like a surgeon inspecting alien anatomy. It looked wrong, delicate wings, razor-thin, almost too small to lift its body. The fuselage was a needle, a single intake feeding the Tamansky R-11 engine. The whole thing seemed absurdly minimal. The F-4 Phantom he flew weighed over 18 tons loaded. This MiG barely touched 7. The F-4 carried 2 engines, 2 crewmen, radar, missiles, and armor. The MiG had none of those luxuries, and yet it could turn inside the Phantom, climb faster, and, at close range, kill it before the radar lock even formed. Carter wrote the numbers on his notepad. MiG-21F, 13, empty weight, 5,200 kilograms. F-4C Phantom, empty weight, 13,800 kilograms. He stopped writing. The pen trembled in his hand. This wasn't just a 2:1 weight difference. It was a difference of philosophy. For months earlier, Carter had been flying over Route Pac 6, escorting F-105s during a bombing raid near Tay Nguyen. It was supposed to be routine. But at 22,000 feet, a pair of MiGs had come from nowhere, tiny dots that became flashing daggers. His radar warning light blinked once, too late. 2 F-4s ahead of him vanished into flame. Carter rolled hard and dove, but the MiG followed. He remembered the terror of that white needle on his tail, impossibly agile. No smoke trail, no sound, just motion. He survived only because his backseater, Lieutenant Pierce, screamed over intercom. "He's overshooting. Pull up now." Carter pulled vertical, and the MiG rocketed past, barely missing him. He saw the red star flash once before it vanished into the clouds. When he landed, his knees were shaking. 2 friends were gone. He never saw their chutes. That night, he wrote a report. MiG-21 can out-accelerate, out-climb, and out-turn F-4 below 20,000 feet. Phantom's radar advantage neutralized in close. It reached the desk of Colonel Lloyd Dutch Holland, head of Air Force Systems Command Test Division at Edwards. Holland read it and sent for Carter. Now, for months later, Carter stood before the same kind of aircraft that had haunted his dreams. April 17th, 1968. Carter strapped into the cockpit of the captured MiG-21. The seat felt narrow, the controls primitive, analog dials, Cyrillic lettering, no redundant systems. The canopy barely cleared his helmet. He flicked the starter. The Tamansky R-11 engine shrieked like tearing metal. The vibration shook his ribs. He pushed the throttle forward. Acceleration was immediate, violent. The MiG leapt forward like a slingshot. At 180 knots, it rotated itself. No lag, no hesitation. It climbed like a bullet. Within seconds, he was passing 10,000 feet. The stick felt alive. Every movement translated directly into motion. There was no hydraulic damping, no computer smoothing, just pilot, muscle, and air. The sensation was terrifying. The F-4 felt like flying a machine. The MiG felt like wearing wings. At 400 knots, he rolled left. The MiG spun like a top. He had to counter input to stop it. It was unstable, twitchy, but unbelievably agile. Then he tried to pull a hard turn. The G-meter spiked past 7. The aircraft groaned. The cockpit shuddered like it would come apart, but it didn't. The turn radius was half what the Phantom could manage. He leveled out, breathing hard. His helmet felt heavy, his chest burning from the GS. "This isn't a fighter," he muttered. "It's a goddamn knife." When he landed, the ground crew swarmed him with clipboards. He pulled off his oxygen mask and just stared at the aircraft. Every bolt, every screw, every design choice screamed one philosophy: simplicity through necessity. The MiG had no radar warning receiver, no complex avionics, no armor. Its fuel tanks weren't self-sealing. Its missiles were short-ranged, primitive, and unreliable. But it didn't need any of that. It only needed to turn, climb, and shoot first. That night, in his barracks, Carter compared data. F-4C Phantom II. Twin engines, radar-guided missiles, Mach 2.2 top speed, 56,000-foot ceiling. MiG-21 single engine, no radar missiles, Mach 2.0 top speed, 59,000-foot ceiling. On paper, the Phantom was superior in every measurable category, except weight, wing loading, and pilot workload. The MiG weighed less than half, had half the wing loading, and required only a fraction of a second to change direction. It wasn't designed to survive a hit. It was designed not to get hit at all. He underlined one line in his notebook. "They built a plane that doesn't fight fair." The next morning, Colonel Holland debriefed him. "What do you think, Dave?" "Sir, I think we've been fighting the wrong war." "Again." "Explain." "We built a bomber that can dogfight. They built a dogfighter that can bomb us." Holland frowned. "So you're saying what? The Phantom's useless?" Carter shook his head. "Not useless. Just philosophically confused." He pointed to a sketch of the MiG's airframe. "Every pound we added in electronics, every circuit and radar dish, we paid for it in maneuverability. The Soviets threw all that away. They built an airplane around a gun and a wing. We built one around a computer." Holland leaned back. "So how do we fix it?" Carter smiled grimly. "We learn from them. We fight their way, then build something better." That was the beginning of what the Pentagon would later call Project HAVE DOUGHNUT, the top-secret evaluation of captured MiGs that would redefine U.S. aerial combat. Carter didn't know it then, but every maneuver he tested, every vibration he felt, would feed into the birth of a new kind of fighter, the one that would inherit the lessons of both philosophies. But first, he had to answer the same question that haunted Commander Reynolds 2 decades earlier. Which philosophy wins wars, technology or simplicity? April 20th, 1968. Udorn Air Base's morning haze shimmered with jet exhaust. Major Carter walked across the tarmac, holding a folder thick with test notes. On the MiG's nose, the number 4326 gleamed like a secret. The entire hangar was sealed, guarded by armed air police. Officially, the aircraft didn't exist. The engineers had stripped it down to the last rivet. Each component weighed, measured, logged. Every bolt told a story about Soviet thinking. The first surprise was the simplicity. No redundant wiring. No backup generators. No hydraulic complexity. Where the Phantom used 3 independent systems, the MiG used 1. The cockpit gauges looked like leftovers from 1945, vacuum-driven, minimal, brutally functional. One American technician stared at the flight control rods and laughed. "You get a bullet through that line, the pilot's done." Carter answered without humor. "Yeah, but maybe he never gets hit." The MiG's airframe construction fascinated him. The aluminum skin was so thin you could flex it with your hands. The welds were crude, but strong. Instead of layered composites or titanium, the Soviets used simple alloys. Cheap, easy to repair, easy to mass produce. Every kilogram saved meant better climb, faster turn, shorter takeoff. He wrote in his notes, MiG-21 equals 5,200 kilograms empty. Phantom equals 13,800 kilograms. Weight difference equals 8,600 kilograms equals entire VW Beetle bolted to each wing. The Americans built airplanes like fortresses. The Soviets built them like bullets. The data was brutal. On paper, the MiG was inferior. In combat, it was killing them anyway. Carter pointed at the final line. The MiG doesn't need radar because it doesn't fight where radar matters. It fights where eyes win. He flipped to the next slide, gun camera footage from North Vietnam. Phantom pilots chasing specks that turned, climbed, vanished. Heat seekers missing. Radar locks breaking. Our missiles can't turn fast enough to hit what they can't see. And when we close the range, we have no guns. The F-4 was designed to win a nuclear war, not a knife fight. A colonel in the back spoke up. So what are you proposing, Major? I'm proposing we stop pretending we can automate air combat. He could feel the tension in the room. The Phantom was the Air Force's pride, a billion-dollar program and a political symbol. Criticizing it was heresy, but the truth was in the numbers. April 23rd. Carter climbed into the MiG again for performance comparison flights against a modified F-4C. The test plan was simple: dogfight scenarios at various altitudes and speeds. At 15,000 feet, both jets accelerated to 400 knots. Carter, flying the MiG, began a climbing turn. The Phantom followed. Within 10 seconds, the MiG was behind it. On the radio, the American test pilot laughed nervously. "Jesus, Dave, this thing turns like it's made of smoke." "Copy that," Carter replied. "And you just died." They repeated the test at 30,000 feet. The MiG's advantage faded. Its small delta wings lost lift. The engine gasped for air. The Phantom now held energy longer, outdiving the MiG. Carter landed, sweating, and scribbled notes on his kneeboard. Below 20,000 feet, MiG dominant. Above 25,000, F-4 regains control. Altitude equals survival. After 3 days, the pattern was clear. The MiG was unbeatable in low-speed, close-in turning fights. But it bled energy fast. It had no endurance, no radar guidance, no long-range reach. The Phantom was the opposite: fast, stable, powerful, but clumsy when forced into knife range. The conclusion was identical to the one Reynolds had drawn 26 years earlier. Don't fight the enemy's fight. Back in his quarters, Carter wrote a classified report titled "Tactical Employment Against Lightweight Supersonic Fighters, MiG-1721. The opening line read, "Our aircraft protect pilots with systems. Their aircraft protect pilots with physics. Both philosophies fail if used incorrectly." He broke the analysis into 5 sections. Keycap: 1 weight philosophy. The MiG saved 8,600 kilograms through elimination. No radar, no redundant hydraulics, no heavy avionics. That weight translated directly into maneuverability. Soviet assumption: avoid hits entirely. Protection is wasteful. Keycap: 2 armament philosophy. MiG-21 carried a single 30mm cannon and 2 short-range missiles, K-13 Atoll. F-4 relied solely on radar-guided AM-7 Sparrows and heat-seeking AM-9 Sidewinders. In real combat, both failed under 3,000 feet. American pilots had to relearn gunnery. Dogfighting had returned. Keycap: 3 training philosophy. Soviet pilots trained for aggressive ambush attacks, short, lethal engagements. U.S. pilots trained for radar intercepts. Result: Americans entered knife fights with spears. Keycap: 4 engineering sustainability. MiGs were cheap, disposable, and quick to build. Phantoms were complex, slow to repair, expensive to replace. The Soviet Union accepted attrition. The U.S. tried to avoid it technologically. Keycap: 5 psychological impact. MiGs terrified pilots because they violated expectations. The enemy was smaller, poorer, and yet winning. His conclusion was as cold as math. Complexity doesn't guarantee survival. In air combat, simplicity multiplied by skill outlives technology multiplied by doctrine. May 1968. Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. The MiG was disassembled, flown secretly to the U.S., and reassembled under maximum security. Carter joined the test program codenamed HAVE Drill. The goal: train American pilots to fight MiGs using their own tactics. He watched young Phantom pilots climb into the captured jet for mock engagements. Every one of them lost on the first try. Some didn't even last 30 seconds. But then something changed. When they stopped trying to dogfight and started using energy tactics, diving fast, climbing away, refusing to turn, the kill ratios reversed. Carter smiled grimly. History was repeating itself. The same tactical evolution that had saved Wildcat pilots from the Zero was now saving Phantom pilots from MiGs. During a debriefing, a test pilot asked, "Major, why are we always slower to adapt?" Carter stared at the MiG through the hangar window. "Because we believe technology will always save us. They believe pilots will save themselves." He paused, then added, "They're wrong in the long run, but in the short run, they're winning." Later that night, he typed the last page of his report. The typewriter keys echoed in the silent office. The MiG-21 embodies a philosophy that values simplicity and performance over safety and systems. It is not an inferior machine. It is a different machine. American doctrine must evolve from technological arrogance to tactical pragmatism. The pilot, not the processor, wins the air war. Our response must not be to copy the MiG. It must be to build a fighter that merges their agility with our survivability. He didn't know it, but the engineers at McDonnell, Northrop, and General Dynamics were already sketching that future. A single-seat jet that could fight like a MiG but survive like a Phantom. The FX program, what would become the F-15 Eagle, was being born from the same philosophy that had risen from the ashes of the Zero. 2 weeks later, Carter was reassigned to Training Command. His MiG data went classified under HAVE DOUGHNUT Level 6 security. Few would read his full report until decades later. But his lessons spread silently. In 1969, the Navy created Top Gun based on the same idea: fight the MiG on its terms, then rewrite the terms. Carter flew one final test sortie in the MiG before it was crated away. As he climbed through 20,000 feet, he looked down at the land below, a patchwork of jungle and scar tissue. "You were built to kill, not to last," he whispered into his mask. "But maybe you taught us how to last." He rolled inverted and dove, the engine screaming, the world a blur of sound and speed. October 2nd, 1969. Edwards Air Force Base, California. The desert shimmered under the late morning heat. Major David Carter stood at the edge of a runway, watching the future take form. A sleek gray prototype, bare metal gleaming in the sun, roared down the strip and leapt skyward. The aircraft carried no markings except a small stencil near the nose. FX prototype, McDonnell Douglas. The engineers called it a testbed. Carter called it a revolution. 2 years earlier, he had flown a relic of Soviet simplicity, a machine that embodied speed and danger without safety. Now, he was watching America's answer. The first jet built not to out-tech the enemy, but to outthink him. The philosophy was clear: power and protection, yes, but with agility restored. No more bomb truck masquerading as a fighter. No more radar-only doctrine that failed the moment the horizon filled with smoke and fear. The test pilot landed, taxied in, and stepped down smiling. "She climbs like a homesick angel," he said. Carter nodded slowly. That's the point. 2 years of classified testing had reshaped American aerial doctrine. The data from the captured MiGs, MiG-17s from defectors, MiG-21F, 13S from Middle Eastern acquisitions, had circulated through secret networks of engineers, analysts, and tacticians. Each page of Carter's report carried invisible fingerprints in design meetings from St. Louis to Dayton. By late 1969, the FX program had absorbed every lesson. The F-15 Eagle would weigh nearly 20,000 kilograms empty, almost 4 times a MiG, but with 2 engines producing 23,000 pounds of thrust each. It would climb faster, accelerate harder, and turn tighter than anything in the sky. It would carry radar, but also a gun, missiles, but also a soul. The Eagle would be born from contradiction, the perfect child of Reynolds's Hellcat and Carter's MiG. November 1969. Carter presented his final lecture at Nellis AFB before transfer to the Pentagon. The room was filled with young pilots, graduates of the newly created Fighter Weapons School, soon to be known worldwide as Top Gun. He stood before a slide showing 2 silhouettes, the Japanese Zero and the Soviet MiG-21. "Gentlemen," he began, "these aircraft were built 30 years apart by nations that never met in design. Yet they share a single idea: performance through sacrifice. The Zero sacrificed armor. The MiG sacrificed electronics. Both killed us until we learned their language." He changed the slide. Now a Wildcat and a Phantom side by side. And we, Americans, have our own recurring sin. We overbuild. We believe more metal means more victory. But wars aren't won by specifications. They're won by philosophy. He paused, scanning the faces of pilots who would soon fly over Laos and Cambodia. The Zero made us build the Hellcat. The MiG made us build the Eagle. Each time we learned the same thing. Sustainability wins wars. Protection, training, and adaptability beat brilliance and bravery. One lieutenant raised a hand. Sir, what about the human factor? You can't engineer courage. Carter smiled faintly. No, but you can design so a man's courage has time to matter. The room was silent. That winter, Carter joined a design review board for the F-15. He walked through the McDonnell Douglas assembly floor, where silver frames hung from cranes like skeletons of prehistoric birds. Engineers swarmed around them, adjusting angles, testing wing flex, calculating load. Every number on every chart felt familiar. Lift coefficients, fuel fractions, thrust ratios. But what mattered was invisible, the balance between performance and protection. The F-15 structure was strong enough to sustain 9G maneuvers and still return home. Its engines produced so much thrust that the jet could accelerate while climbing vertically. It carried radar that could track targets 100 miles away, but Carter insisted it must also have an internal cannon. He fought for that 20mm M61 Vulcan like a crusade. Missiles fail, he told the board. Guns don't. Some protested. This is the missile age. So it was 1965, Carter shot back until we met MiGs over Hanoi. He won. The gun stayed. The Eagle would carry both future and past. 1972, over North Vietnam. Carter wasn't there anymore. His flying days ended with a damaged spine from high-G testing, but his fingerprints were. The skies above Hanoi erupted as Operation Linebacker 2 unleashed the full might of U.S. air power. Phantoms returned to the fight with gun pods, improved missiles, and, more importantly, new tactics born from the captured MiG program. Air combat kill ratios began to shift. In 1967, American pilots had barely broken even, one MiG destroyed for each Phantom lost. By 1972, the ratio had climbed above 4-1. The difference wasn't new hardware, it was new understanding. Pilots now fought using energy tactics, maintaining speed, altitude, and awareness instead of turning until death. They fought like mathematicians, not duelists. And somewhere in a hangar at Edwards, engineers assembled the first operational F-15A. 1974, Eglin Air Force Base. Carter, now a lieutenant colonel, stood before the prototype Eagle for the first time in full combat colors. He ran a hand along the intake lip, feeling the cold precision of its design. The numbers ran through his head automatically. Empty weight, 12,700 kilograms. Max thrust, 47,000 pounds. Thrust-to-weight ratio, greater than 1. Climb rate, 50,000 feet per minute. Combat load, 4 AIM-7s, for AIM-9s, 1 M61 cannon. He whispered, half to himself. So this is what happens when you stop choosing between power and grace. The test pilot that day, Major Roger Smith, returned from the first flight grinning ear to ear. How's she feel? Carter asked. Like the MiG grew up and went to college, Smith laughed. Carter laughed too, but there was melancholy in it. Because he knew what that meant. The age of trial by death was ending. The Eagle would dominate the skies so completely that air-to-air combat itself would fade into history. 1982, Bekaa Valley, Lebanon. Israeli F-15s, descendants of the prototype Carter once touched, faced Soviet-built MiGs in the largest jet dogfight since World War II. The results were biblical. 82 MiGs destroyed, 0 Eagles lost. The reports crossed Carter's desk at the Pentagon. He read them quietly, then closed the folder. It was over. The philosophies that had dueled through 3 decades had reached their verdict. The MiG's creed, simplicity over safety, had won its duels but lost its war. The American creed, sustainability over speed, had outlasted it. That evening he sat alone in his office, a glass of black coffee cooling beside him, and reread his first field note from 1968. They built a plane that doesn't fight fair. He smiled sadly. And we built one that doesn't have to. He thought about the pilots who'd never come home, the friends who'd vanished into white smoke over Haiphong, the laughter in hangars that always hid grief. For all the data and equations, it always ended in the same truth. Technology could only postpone mortality. What truly saved lives was understanding. Understanding of physics, of doctrine, of human limits. He opened his notebook one last time and began writing his final paragraph for an Air Force lecture that would later circulate among test squadrons. Air combat is not evolution. It is recursion. Every generation rediscovers the same truth in different metal. The Zero taught us the cost of weight. The MiG taught us the cost of complexity. The Eagle exists because we remembered both. He paused, then added the last line. Simplicity kills quickly. Sustainability wins slowly. But in the end, survival is victory. July 4, 1976. Carter attended the public unveiling of the F-15 at Langley. Crowds cheered as twin eagles thundered past in perfect formation, contrails crossing like white blades against blue. The announcer's voice boomed over loudspeakers. The world's first air superiority fighter that cannot be outclimbed, outturned, or outrun. He closed his eyes and listened. The engines roared like a promise kept. Somewhere, he imagined, the ghosts of the Zero and the MiG watched too, two ancient rivals whose lessons were now welded into the bones of this new machine. As the eagles banked and rose vertically into the sky, sunlight flashed off their wings, momentarily blinding him. He thought of the numbers again. Reynolds's 280 kilograms, his own 8,600. Each kilogram a choice, a belief, a life. He whispered quietly, "Every pound we add saves a man. Every pound we remove costs one." The crowd cheered as the fighters vanished into the sun. Carter stood alone on the tarmac, the heat rippling around him, and finally allowed himself to breathe. The war had ended years ago. The lessons never would. Epilogue. By the time the F-15 retired its combat record, decades later, it had destroyed over 100 enemy aircraft without a single air-to-air loss. Its design lineage traced directly through the captured MiGs of 1968, just as the Hellcats traced through the captured Zero of 1942. Two generations of pilots had died to teach the same principle. That survivability is the only true performance metric that matters. Major David L. Carter never flew again after 1970, but his notes remained required reading in advanced tactics schools. On the last page of his personal copy, beneath fading typewritten lines, he had written by hand. The MiG was brilliant engineering. The Eagle was sustainable engineering. Brilliance wins battles. Sustainability wins wars. He closed the book, signed his name, and filed it under a single word: lessons.